There are new bombshell claims today from royal insiders who say King Charles's cancer is incurable and he will likely die with the disease.
The evening was meant to be private, controlled and silent, the kind of royal gathering where every name, every chair, and every entrance had already been approved. But one face at the door shattered the entire plan. King Charles saw what no one expected him to see. Meghan and Harry had appeared, and within moments, the monarch made a decision that stunned the room. The gathering was cancelled. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Silence hit first. Charles did not raise his voice, and that made the moment even colder. He simply stopped, his face tightening as though the air itself had changed. Behind him stood Camilla, William, Catherine, Princess Anne, and a small circle of trusted household figures who had gathered for what was supposed to be a closed royal evening. A private gathering, in plain language, meant a family event kept away from cameras, public duties, and outside pressure. That mattered because every person present had been chosen with care, and every entrance had been approved before the first door opened. Yet now, at the edge of that protected space, stood the two people no one in the room expected to see. Harry held himself stiffly beside Meghan, but the confidence in his posture could not hide the tension in his eyes. He had come too far to step back easily, and she stood beside him with a calm expression that made the silence even sharper. The king looked at his son, then at the woman beside him, and the pain of the moment moved through the room before anyone spoke. This was not just a father seeing a child at the door. This was a monarch, facing the one thing he had tried to prevent: private access being challenged in front of the family. The inner circle, meaning the small group allowed into the most guarded royal spaces, had not accepted them into the evening. That single fact changed everything. A senior aide moved closer, careful and pale, then whispered the words that confirmed the crisis. Their names were not on the final entry list. The final entry list was the approved record of who could enter that night, and without it, even blood could not erase the boundary. Camilla watched Charles with growing alarm because she understood his expression was not simple anger. It was recognition. Something behind palace walls had led to this. Something older than this doorway. Something the family had been carrying in silence. William's face changed when he looked at Harry. The prince did not move quickly, but Catherine felt the shift beside him, and Anne saw it too. The future king understood that the cancelled gathering was not the end of the night. It was the first sign that the family rupture had entered a more dangerous stage. And before anyone could understand why Charles reacted so severely, the room had to face the painful truth about every person standing on either side of that door. A royal doorway is never just a doorway. It is permission. It is trust. It is access to the private world the public never sees. And on this night, that threshold became a battlefield. Charles stood inside, guarding what remained of royal order. Harry stood outside, wounded yet determined. Meghan stood beside him, calm but unreadable. William watched from within, knowing this moment could not be undone. Charles understood the weight of the space behind him. This was not a public appearance, not a charity reception, not a smiling family line for cameras. It was a protected family gathering, meaning a private royal meeting where only approved people were allowed because sensitive conversations, personal wounds, and future decisions could be discussed without outside pressure. That mattered because the monarchy survives on control, and control begins with who is allowed near the room. The king had cancelled the evening because Meghan and Harry's arrival turned a family moment into a test of authority. Harry looked straight at his father, searching for one small crack in the monarch's expression. A softer look, a private signal, anything that said he was still a son before he was a problem. But Charles gave him nothing. The king's silence left him exposed in front of the family, and that silence hurt more than a shouted order ever could. Meghan stayed close to Harry, steady and composed. But Catherine noticed the tiny change in her face when nobody stepped forward. Not William, not Camilla, not Anne, nobody. Meghan did not ask for welcome, yet the absence of welcome spoke loudly. She had walked in beside Harry at the exact moment palace trust was already fragile, and that made their presence feel less like healing and more like pressure. Catherine saw it immediately. The princess knew this was not only about two people arriving at a door. It was about whether pain could be turned into access, whether family emotion could override private boundaries, and whether Charles would still hold the line once his own son stood before him. Princess Anne broke the silence in the sharpest way possible. She turned slightly toward a senior aide and asked whether anyone had approved their arrival. The aide did not answer at first, and that pause became more powerful than any sentence. Approval, in simple terms, meant official permission from the royal household before someone could enter a private event. Without it, even a familiar face became a threat to order. Anne understood that. Charles understood it too. And Harry understood, painfully, that the silence was already an answer. William moved closer to Catherine without saying a word. The prince knew Harry's appearance had triggered something Charles had feared for months. A forced moment at the door, where emotion would collide with duty, and someone would have to lose. Catherine felt his tension before he spoke. Harry saw him move and knew the distance between them had grown again. Meghan noticed it too, and the calm around her began to feel like armor. The cancellation was no longer only about one ruined evening. It was proof that the door had become forbidden long before Meghan and Harry arrived. Charles had not reacted from surprise alone. William had not gone still without reason. Anne had not asked that question by accident. Something had happened earlier, something private, something buried beneath months of silence. And that hidden incident began with one conversation the palace never forgot. Long before Meghan and Harry appeared at that door, the palace had already drawn an invisible line. It was not drawn in public. It was not announced from a balcony. It began in a closed room after a private memorial lunch. When Harry asked for access to a family gathering he had not been invited to attend, and Meghan's name changed the temperature of the room forever. Harry had walked into that earlier conversation carrying hope, but he left carrying humiliation. The private memorial lunch at Windsor had been arranged to honor family memory, and Windsor, in simple terms, is one of the royal family's most symbolic homes, a place tied to mourning, duty, and old wounds. That mattered, because any request made there carried emotional weight. Harry asked Charles to allow Meghan into future private royal gatherings as a sign that trust could be rebuilt. He did not ask it like a royal demand. He asked it like a son asking to be seen again. Charles did not answer quickly. The king listened, his face controlled, but the silence between them grew heavier with every second. Harry watched him carefully, searching for warmth. But the monarch had already learned that family pain could become palace pressure if boundaries were left unclear. A private royal gathering, meaning a closed family event away from public duty and outside influence, mattered because sensitive conversations often happened there. One wrong presence could turn grief into strategy, and Charles knew it. Still, he did not reject the request at once, and that delay gave Harry a dangerous kind of hope. Harry believed that pause meant there was still a door open somewhere. Meghan's name, however, had changed everything. When Charles later ordered that certain private gatherings remain restricted unless every senior family member agreed, the wound inside his son hardened. Senior family members, meaning the most central working royals whose judgment shapes private family decisions, now held power over access. To Harry, it felt less like protection and more like punishment. He had asked for restored trust, and what came back felt like a locked gate. Charles sat alone after that conversation, his hand resting on the table, torn between fatherly sorrow and kingly caution. He loved his son, but the king feared what would happen if love became the only rule. Anne later warned him in a documented private account, prepared for the household, that emotional pressure at a doorway could be used to force access. The princess did not speak softly in that account. She made it clear that a surprise arrival would put the monarch in an impossible position. William privately supported the restriction, and he did it with pain, not cruelty. The prince feared that any uncontrolled meeting could reopen wounds around Catherine and disturb the children's fragile sense of calm. Catherine had endured enough storms around the family, and the future king believed one more unguarded encounter could pull her back into a conflict she had worked hard to rise above. Harry did not hear those fears directly, but he felt their result. That old Windsor conversation now returned like a verdict. Charles had feared the doorway. Anne had warned him about it. William had prepared for it. And Harry, standing there beside Meghan, had unknowingly walked straight into the moment the family had been trying to avoid. When the past finally reached the door, there was no longer room for polite silence, only confrontation. The silence broke, not with a shout, but with a sentence. Harry asked his father if he was really going to turn him away in front of everyone. The words landed like glass on stone. Charles did not move. Meghan looked from the king to William. Camilla held her breath. And then the private gathering became something more dangerous than an event. It became a family trial. Harry stood near the doorway, but his words had already crossed into the room. The private gathering, meaning a closed family event where only approved people could enter, had already been cancelled, yet the emotional damage was still unfolding. That mattered because the cancellation was not just about dinner or conversation. It was about access, trust, and who had the right to step inside the most protected spaces of the monarchy. Charles had given the order, but now the father had to face the son, who felt rejected in front of everyone. Harry looked at Charles and asked whether blood no longer mattered. The king's face tightened because that question cut deeper than protocol. Protocol, in simple terms, is the set of royal rules that decides how people behave, where they stand, and what boundaries must be respected. But this moment was bigger than rules. It was about a son asking if family still had power, and a monarch deciding that family could no longer erase broken trust. Charles did not answer quickly. His pause made the corridor colder. Meghan stepped closer to Harry and said they had come to speak as family. Her voice stayed low, but Catherine felt the effect instantly. William's jaw tightened beside her, and the princess knew those words had reopened old pain. Meghan looked calm, yet her calmness carried pressure. She had not raised her voice, but her presence forced everyone to choose a side. Catherine watched the future king carefully, because she understood that his silence was not weakness. It was restraint under strain. Charles finally spoke, and the room changed. The king said family could not be used as a key to rooms where trust had been broken. The sentence struck Harry hard. It told him this was never only about attendance. It was about years of wounds, private fears, and the belief that one surprise arrival could turn the monarchy's boundary into a public test. Meghan heard it too, and for the first time, her composure seemed to sharpen instead of soften. Princess Anne stepped forward before the silence could swallow the moment. She told Harry that arriving without approval had forced the king's hand. Approval meant clear permission from the household before entering a restricted royal space, and without it, even a familiar face became a crisis. Anne's words left the corridor colder because she did not speak with anger. She spoke with certainty. Harry looked from her to Charles, and the pain in his face deepened. William had not spoken yet, but everyone felt the weight of his silence. The prince stood close to Catherine, watching Harry and Meghan with the careful stillness of someone measuring every word before it became history. Charles had cancelled the gathering, Anne had defended the boundary, and Camilla had seen the cost on the monarch's face. But the real power behind the decision had not fully revealed itself, because behind the king's cancellation was not only a father's hurt, It was a carefully protected structure of authority. Power in the monarchy rarely announces itself. It moves through quiet nods, withheld invitations, and names removed before ink dries. On this night, the most important decision had already been shaped before Meghan and Harry arrived. Charles gave the order, but William's silence carried weight. Anne's warning carried history. Catherine's stillness carried pain. And Camilla knew the king was no longer deciding alone. Charles stood with the authority of the crown, but everyone in that room knew power had shifted in quieter ways. The crown, in simple terms, means the monarchy's authority, duty, and public position carried by the king. That mattered because his decision was not just personal anger. It was a signal that private royal access would now be protected like an institution, not offered like a family favor. William's role as future king gave his judgment enormous force, and the prince's silence made Harry look even more isolated. William finally spoke with careful control. He told Harry that private access could not be demanded after years of broken confidence. The words were not loud, but they landed with final weight. Harry looked wounded, because the prince was not speaking like a brother trying to win an argument. He was speaking like the future king, guarding a future he believed had already been threatened. Meghan heard the message clearly, and her glance toward Catherine made the air tighten again. Catherine stayed quiet, but her silence was not empty. The princess looked shaken, especially when Meghan's eyes found her across the room. That moment trapped both women inside a history neither could escape. Catherine understood why boundaries mattered. Because every private clash eventually seemed to return to her doorstep, her children, and the fragile calm William had tried to protect. Meghan understood something else. No one was opening the door for her, and no one was pretending anymore. Anne's earlier warning now became central. She had told Charles in a documented household account that a forced doorway moment could pressure the monarch both publicly and privately. The princess had feared exactly this kind of arrival, where emotion would be used before witnesses and refusal would look cruel. Charles had listened then. Now the king saw that warning come alive in front of him, and the pain on his face proved he hated being right. A courtier stepped close and confirmed that the approved guest list had been checked twice that afternoon. An approved guest list means the final names cleared for entry into a private royal event, and bypassing it turns a personal visit into a security and trust crisis. That mattered because Meghan and Harry had not simply surprised the family. They had walked around the order everyone else had respected. Camilla watched Charles place one hand against the doorframe before stepping back, and the queen consort understood the gesture instantly. Charles chose distance over emotional surrender. The king did not look triumphant. He looked older, heavier, almost defeated by the decision he still refused to reverse. Camilla saw the cost. William saw the necessity. Catherine saw the damage. Anne saw the confirmation of everything she had warned about. Harry saw the line harden before him, and Meghan saw the room close without a single person breaking formation. The door closed, and the gathering ended. But the silence afterward carried more danger than the confrontation itself. Once the room emptied, consequences would begin immediately, and the first person to break down would not be the one everyone expected. The gathering was over. The boundary had held, and the fallout began before the palace had even found the words to explain it. Nothing sounds louder in a palace than a room prepared for people who never sit down. The chairs remained arranged. The glasses remained untouched. The evening's private warmth had vanished, replaced by the cold proof that something permanent had shifted. Charles walked back into the room alone. Camilla followed without speaking. William stayed near Catherine, and somewhere beyond the closed door, Harry understood what had just happened. Charles did not sit immediately. He stood near the chair meant for him, and looked at the space, as if the room itself had become a witness. The gathering had not been delayed. It had been fully cancelled, and that mattered, because a delay would have suggested uncertainty, while cancellation sent a clear message that emotional pressure would not override royal boundaries. Royal boundaries, in simple terms, are the private limits that protect family spaces, sensitive talks, and the monarchy's control over who enters its inner world. The king had chosen those limits over the pain of the moment, and everyone knew the cost. Camilla watched him lower himself into the chair he had been expected to occupy. He removed his glasses slowly, and for the first time that night, the authority around him looked like grief. The queen consort did not rush to speak. She knew that silence was safer than comfort when the wound was still open. Charles had defended the monarchy, but the father inside him had been struck. That was why the cancelled evening mattered. It proved he could act like a king, even when the decision hurt like a parent. Harry stood outside with Meghan, and the reality settled on him in pieces. His shoulders dropped. The anger had not disappeared, but beneath it sat something heavier. Charles had not simply refused entry. The monarch had chosen the structure of the crown over a son's appeal. The crown means the royal office and duty carried by the king, not just the person wearing it. And that difference cut Harry deeply. Meghan remained beside him, but even her calm could not soften what the closed door had said. William listened as an aide informed him that a brief palace response would be prepared. A palace response, meaning the official wording, released to control public understanding, would be careful and cold. The prince warned that no sentence could soften what everyone had witnessed. Catherine heard the exhaustion in his voice, and she stayed close, because she knew this was no ordinary family disagreement. It was the kind of rupture that changes how people stand near each other forever. Camilla finally asked Charles if he was certain. The king looked at her and answered with quiet finality. Allowing that door to open would have made every future boundary meaningless. She absorbed the words, and he looked away, not because he doubted them, but because they were true. Yet the night was not finished. Charles asked for one private conversation. No aides, no advisors, no protection of protocol. After the machinery of monarchy had done its work, only family remained wounded, exposed, and forced to speak without witnesses. For the first time that night, there were no aides between them, no guest list, no whispered instructions, just Charles and Harry in a smaller room, both carrying the weight of titles they could not set down. The king had cancelled the gathering, but the father still had to face the son. And in that private silence, the true cost of the decision finally became visible. Charles did not enter that room to change his mind. He entered it because even a monarch cannot leave a son bleeding at the edge of a closed door without one final word. The cancellation still stood, and that mattered, because reversing it would have made the whole boundary collapse. A boundary, in plain language, means the clear line that decides what is allowed and what is not. For the king, this line protected private royal space from pressure, surprise, and emotional force. For Harry, it felt like proof that his place in the family had been reduced to permission. Harry spoke first, and his voice carried more hurt than anger. He told Charles he had been humiliated in front of everyone, and the words struck the monarch with visible pain. The king admitted quietly that the moment had hurt him too. He did not pretend it was easy. He did not hide behind cold duty. But he also made clear that pain could not become a reason to reopen every door. Harry looked at him, waiting for softness to turn into surrender, but Charles did not give him that. Meghan waited outside while William remained nearby with Catherine, and that separation made the night feel even sharper. Meghan was close enough to know a decision was being sealed, but far enough away to understand she was not part of that final father and son exchange. William stayed near Catherine because the prince understood the public consequence of every private word being spoken. Catherine stayed quiet, but she knew this moment mattered, because one careless promise could pull the family back into the same storm again. Charles told Harry he could love his son without reopening every royal space to chaos. The words were tender, but they were final. Royal space, meaning the private rooms, meetings, and family gatherings protected from outside pressure had become too fragile to risk. Harry lowered his eyes because he heard the truth inside the sentence. The king was not saying love was gone. He was saying love was no longer enough to cancel caution. Charles then revealed, through a recorded private conversation later preserved in a fictional household account, that the cancelled gathering had included sensitive family discussions. Sensitive discussions meant private talks about future roles, household trust, and decisions that could affect the monarchy's direction. That made Harry and Meghan's unapproved arrival more serious than they had understood. It was not only a surprise, it was an arrival at the wrong door, at the worst possible time. Harry asked if there was any way back. Charles paused, and the silence nearly answered before he did. The king told him trust could return only through time, not pressure at a palace door. Harry absorbed the words slowly. They did not sound cruel. That made them hurt more. Meghan waited outside. William watched the distance between old loyalty and future duty, and Catherine felt the whole night settling into history. Harry left the room with the private verdict already delivered. Charles remained behind, carrying the grief of a father and the burden of a monarch in the same breath. The door had not reopened. The cancellation had not been undone, and by morning, the closed door was no longer a palace secret. It had become the image Britain could not stop discussing. Dawn did not soften the story. It sharpened it. By breakfast, the cancelled gathering had escaped the walls of the palace and become a national symbol. The image was simple enough for everyone to understand. A king inside, a son outside, and a door that did not open. The monarchy had survived scandals before, but this moment felt different because it was intimate, visual, and brutally human. Catherine read the first headlines in silence. She did not rush through them. She let every word settle, then folded the newspaper slowly, as if the paper itself carried the weight of the night before. The palace response had confirmed only that the private gathering did not proceed. And a palace response, in simple terms, is the official wording released to shape what the public hears. That mattered because the words were careful, but the silence around them was louder. The less the palace explained, the more Britain imagined the pain behind the closed door. William watched Catherine's face change as she lowered the paper. The prince told her the family could not keep absorbing shocks without consequence, and she heard the quiet exhaustion in his voice. This was why the moment mattered beyond one cancelled evening. Every private wound had become public debate. Every family boundary had become a national argument. William knew that if the monarchy looked weak inside its own walls, the outside world would sense it immediately. Catherine knew it too, and that knowledge made her silence heavier. Newspapers turned the cancelled gathering into a story of duty, rejection, and limits. One front page captured the country's feeling with brutal simplicity. A dark palace doorway beneath the headline, "The Door That Stayed Shut." A front page, meaning the most important story printed on the first page of a newspaper, matters because it tells the public what emotion to carry into the day. That single image made the crisis easy to understand. Charles had stayed inside. Harry had remained outside. Meghan had stood beside him, and the door had not opened. Broadcasters spoke with the controlled urgency of a nation watching a family fracture in real time. One morning presenter framed it as, "The moment forgiveness met duty, and duty did not move." A line that spread quickly because it sounded less like commentary and more like a verdict. Royal commentators argued over whether Charles had been cruel or necessary. Some saw a father refusing his son. Others saw a monarch protecting the only boundary left. But everyone agreed on one thing. The cancelled gathering had changed the emotional language of the monarchy. Outside Buckingham Palace, a small crowd gathered near the gates. Some held phones. Others simply stood there, staring as if the building itself had become part of the story. Buckingham Palace, in plain language, is the central public symbol of the British monarchy. The place many people connect with royal authority and national feeling. That mattered, because the public was no longer reacting to policy or ceremony. They were reacting to pain. A closed door had become something anyone could understand. Catherine folded the paper once more and set it aside. William looked toward the headlines, but his mind was already back at the room, back at Harry's face, back at Charles choosing the monarchy over surrender. The prince knew the debate would rage, but the real answer had been given the night before. The public could argue about cruelty or necessity, yet the final verdict belonged to what the king chose to protect. And when the noise faded, one truth remained standing above every headline, every argument, and every tear. In the end, the cancelled gathering was not about one evening. It was about the point at which a family stops pretending that love can survive without boundaries. Charles did not close the door because he felt nothing. He closed it because he felt too much grief, duty, regret, fear, and the terrible knowledge that monarchy cannot function when private trust is treated as public leverage. Charles allowed the decision to stand, and that choice became the final shape of the night. The gathering was cancelled, the boundary held, and the monarchy's private order remained protected. Private order, in simple terms, means the quiet system that decides who enters the most sensitive royal spaces and who must remain outside them. That mattered because once such a boundary is broken, every future door becomes easier to challenge. The king understood that. He carried the pain of it, but he did not retreat from it. Harry left with Meghan knowing the rejection had cut in two directions. It was personal because it came from his father, and it was institutional because it came from the crown. The crown means the royal duty and authority carried by the monarch, not simply the person himself. That made the wound harder to bear. Harry had arrived hoping family ties might still open a path. Meghan had stood beside him believing presence could force a response. But the palace showed that access could no longer be demanded, even by those who once lived closest to its heart. Charles carried the cost quietly. He did not celebrate the closed door. He did not treat the cancellation like victory. The king accepted that a monarch cannot heal every wound by reopening every room, and a father cannot prove love by surrendering every boundary. That was the cruel truth of the night. Love remained, but trust did not. And without trust, reconciliation becomes fragile, dangerous, and easy to turn into another crisis. William understood what the night had confirmed. The prince was not simply waiting to inherit the crown, he was learning what it would demand from him. He saw that the future king must defend the structure, even when the structure hurts the people inside it. Catherine's quiet strength mattered just as much. The princess did not need to dominate the confrontation to shape it. Her restraint showed that silence, when held with dignity, can be stronger than anger. Meghan and Harry's appearance would not be remembered as a successful return. It would be remembered as the moment the palace answered without shouting. Charles chose the monarchy's survival over emotional surrender, and the family finally accepted that reconciliation without trust is only another form of danger. This was the night a private gathering became a royal reckoning, and the door that stayed shut became the clearest answer the monarchy had given in years. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.